This is Writer Life, a podcast about writing, life, coffee and conversation with Rob and John Morgan.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Writer Life. Today I'm going to look at the subject of broken bonds and why it is actually quite important to kind of reflect some of the kind of instances we see in life today where people are not quite as society thinks they should be, especially in regard to relationships. Now, I'm struggling a little bit, and the podcast is late because I've had a really sore throat, and it's been a little bit difficult to talk, so I'm running one day late on this particular episode. Hopefully, we'll get through this, and I will once again provide something that will hopefully make you all think and consider many of the books that you may have read in the past. Recently, I attended an event that was a small local festival, and I had the pleasure of interacting with a great many people. Now, for myself, it was fascinating because I got to see lots and lots of individuals interacting on a much larger scale, which, when you're a writer sat at your desk, you're kind of isolated away from that. So it's good to get out. For people like me especially, to get out and actually do a little bit of people watching, which is where an awful lot of ideas for writing comes from. Now, this event was a camping event, so there was a lot of time mingling and chatting, especially in the evenings, as I got to sit with single people and also couples with families. During the event, two friends of ours joined in a handfast ceremony, and all of the camp came together to celebrate their union. It was a really beautiful ceremony, and it was also actually really emotional for everybody watching. And it has given me a great deal to sort of ponder and think about since it happened, because what I noticed was the power that was felt by everyone as they worked as one to create something very special to allow these two people to commit to each other. I think in many ways it was almost as if, because these two friends joined and made a commitment to each other, it was somehow more acceptable, and it gave them more credibility as a couple in the eyes of all of the onlookers. Relationships are important, not just to the individual, but to those who surround them. It's an important part of society and community today, and it brought joy to the hearts of all who witnessed it. I feel that seeing others come together and share their love does strike very deeply in the hearts of others, as they either, remember a lost love, or think of a current love, or it renews their hopes that one day they too will find a similar kind of love. Now, it's clear to me that our daily interactions and bonds are possibly the most important aspects of life today. And yet, as I look back through my own years of long conversations, personal experiences, and what I've witnessed in others, I feel at times that we forget too many of the other relationships that we also have. And they're somewhat lessened as we couple up and form unions with another person. Relationships are far more than just dating or marriage. They form a fundamental part of all of our lives, and they start with our own relationship to ourselves. They then spread into the ones that we have with our parents, our siblings, friends, associates, and so on. Every person that we meet, we form some form of interaction with, and in doing so, whether we're aware of it or not, we actually do begin to form some form of relationship. Now, in the world today, when we use the word relationship, 99% of the time, people assume it's one with an intimate partner. But when you think about it, relationships are much broader, and all of them are deeply personal to us as individuals. Now, they can be deep and strong, or they can be surface and casual. And as much as society tries to define them with, certain rules, I found that every bond and every form of personal relationship is utterly unique. And it does not always fit the societal narrative that we're supposed to adhere to. In the books that I write, and in all of the books that I've published today, I do try to show the many different ways in which, as individuals, we all interact with those who are around us. Now, some of those are close and loving, and some are filled with animosity, and others can be a source of great pain. I like to think that I write from life, and yes, I do include a great deal of my own feelings and experiences, but not all that I include in my stories is actually about me. Some of it comes from the many that I've interacted with, and they have shared their stories with me. I can remember that I once had a reader who commented to me, "I love all of the small examples of life you show, and at times I really do love the wisdom you hide within them." I really do think it's important to not only show life, and I mean, the real naked truth of life. I feel there should also be some moments of pausing for thought, which I then give to my characters. So within the dialogue, I allow them to talk out their feelings and search for an answer. Not only does this provide a deeper insight to the character, but it also allows the readers to pick up on things that they can identify with. And, it's my hope it allows the reader little moments of reflection that, fit or tailor into their own experiences and parts of their own life. If, like I do, you take a back seat and you just watch and learn, you can see that friendships, loving bonds, and family are all defined by society. It's like there is some sort of unwritten rules that everybody simply knows and adheres to. But I also feel that there are many aspects of life where certain parties reject the role of society, and they actually live their lives in a way that runs contrary to popular opinion. Not all relationships are good or wholesome. Some can be strained and painful, and nothing like that of what society defines. And again, I also weave these kind of stories and these kind of feelings and narratives, into the stories that I like to write. Now, one such aspect of life is the relationship between a child and their parents, which again, I've written about in a negative and a positive light, because I know from life not all parental family connections are defined in the way that society would wish them to. For example, if you take the role of Edwin in the Curio Chronicles, he rules his household and his daughter with a very strict code of conduct that actually robs both of his wife and their daughter of all of their identity and all of their individuality. His wife gives up painting because he doesn't like the fact she gets more credit than he does. Edwin can be really cold and ruthless, which is seen in the published books, and it most certainly will be there in some of the versions of the books that are to be published as the series continues. Now, not everything I write is bad. If you take a step back and you look at Heirs to the Kingdom, you can see the sort of idealized relationship that Robbie has when he first meets Iona, his daughter. And, I think it's next year it's due out, but the book Violet Stone will show the bond and the strength of love that exists between Iona and her parents, and also her other siblings. So I do write some very, very positive things. In Kingdom again, we can see how Robbie idolizes his own father. He really respects him. But there are other aspects that I think a lot of writers tend to avoid it. And I don't think it should be avoided. And so I add it. In Curio's Christmas, Edwin is faced by Abigail. And, she knows that her father is aware of her income. And she tries to make him reason with her. But he makes it impossible for her, as all he wants is the money. And that is, even if that results in destabilizing the life of his own daughter. And in the book, there's a passage where Abby goes to the pub to sort of calm her father down and find out why he's still in mutton. I'm in a deal, Abigail. I'm sorry. I need it now. I gave a sigh. Nothing changes when it comes to money, does it, Dad? You would even screw your own daughter over to make a profit. I watched as he smugly sat back. Business is business, Abigail. This is not personal. It's simply a deal. I thought they taught you that at university. God, I hate him. I shook my head. You're a real piece of work. Not personal. How bloody personal could this be? You're my father. You're supposed to give a shit and protect me. And yet here you are, trying to fleece me. You know I have the cash. And you also know that if I give you the full amount now, it'll crash my trust fund and I'll have nothing left to live on. And yet you would happily take that away from me? I made my offer. In 2 weeks, when the cash transfers from the States, I can pay you. It will damage my fund, but I can do it. If Mum and me ever meant anything to you, then slap. Birch leaned over my side with a hand on a cheque, placed firmly and flat on the table. Her voice was angry, and yet quiet. Don't beg this piece of shit, Deds. You're worth 1,000 times more than that. Now, if you think about this, society says that Edwin should love his daughter and protect her, and yet he's quite happy to watch her squirm, knowing she will eventually hand over her entire savings to him. If it was not for Birch, Abigail would lose everything, and yet Edwin only cares for the money. He's everything a father's not meant to be, according to the rules of society. This is noted earlier in the books as Abigail thinks about her own life around her father, and she comes to the only conclusion that she possibly can, and she says, "It's funny when you look back and suddenly you finally see the truth. For all of these years I'd refused to accept his coldness, his cruelty, his lack of emotion. I wonder, is that what we do? Is it some sort of pattern we all fall into to excuse their behaviour for no other reason than they are a parent? It feels like society puts so much pressure on us to love our parents, and yet they were shitty. They did not live up to the same standard. They could abuse us, but society says we must love them. Society's screwed up, and I'm not having any of it." Okay, so, I wrote the book, but I do think that this is a wonderful observation that is made by Abby as she walks home with Birch, because I know people who beat themselves up and tortured themselves with the guilt of knowing that they could not love their parents for the abuse they suffered because of them. Abigail does say it perfectly when she says it feels like society puts so much pressure on us to love our parents, and yet they were shitty. They did not live up to the same standard. I mean, in all fairness, society has set an impossible standard, and yet there are many who buy into the hype of a perfect life, and as a result, they suffer because of it. I really do feel that it is important within stories to show the whole truth of what I have witnessed through my life. And the Curio Chronicles has actually been my way of highlighting many of the injustices and faults with some relationships that I have witnessed in my own life, as I observe not only my own life, but the lives of other people who surrounded me. Now, okay, saying that, there are those who misread the signs, I mean, of course, they confuse the facts of the truth. I think it is really, really easy to blame a parent for not being present in your life, and I've seen that done a great deal. And it's not that difficult to come to the assumption that, a parent doesn't want to know you because they're not actually present in your life. And this again is something I've had dealing within my own life. And I felt it was important to work into the story, although it really isn't one of the easiest things to slip in. When I was 4, my father and I were separated, and I didn't see him again till I was 33. So as you can imagine, from age 16 to age 33, I was angry at him. I was told all sorts of things about him, he was not portrayed very nicely. And when I finally did get to confront him, which, was a difficult time for both of us because I didn't make it easy, I was able to see a completely different side to things, and I realised that I was wrong, that the things that had been told me were not true and I shouldn't believe them. And I wanted to address this in a story, but as I said, it's not the easiest of things to slip in. My chance to actually address this issue came up during the writing of Hans Cottage, where Emily does not understand her father at all. And, she's aware that her mother was a very kind and very loving person. And so, because she sees her father as kind of cold and unfeeling, she questions how could her mother even love a man like this? And she drifts into her memories as she remembers her grandmother Hannah. I find it strange he never really understood me. Hannah's always told me so many times I was so like my mother, and he did, after all, marry her. I've often wondered why he cannot connect with me. Why is he always so closed off? Did he ever really love my mother? It was hard to know why, but the simple truth was we were like strangers, having an awkward conversation, fighting to find words that would resonate with each other, and neither of us really understanding the other one. I cannot deny, once I hit 14, I just stopped trying. My mind slipped into my memories from that time. Oh, there you are, I should have known, always at the gate. Han walked towards me, her bright eyes with those lovely little smile lines on her dark round face. Thinking about him again, I ponder why you try to figure him out. I gave a sigh. Did he love my mum? Han, really love her? Or was he just using her? She leaned against the gate and gave a long, sad sigh. Emmy, my child, I can certainly tell you that Amelia loved him deeply. And to be honest, in a strange way, I think he loved her just as deeply. I'll not deny, they looked lovely together. I nodded as I glanced at her at my side. Why do I feel so unloved then? Han, I'm 17, and everyone tells me how like my mum I am. So why can he not see it? She took my hand and held it softly. Emmy, if you want my honest opinion, losing her killed all the joy in his heart. He was a mess for a long, long time, which is why you came to me. I'll not deny he changed after that. He was colder, more distant. And if you want my opinion, I honestly think it hurt him so deeply, and after that he was afraid to feel anything, let alone love. I've seen this a great deal in life. A person believes life must be a certain way, but as we all know, life can be messy and difficult to navigate. It's become common in the modern world for couples to separate, and one parent will have the children and use the other, or use the children I should say, as weapons against the absent parent. And they do it by either poisoning their minds or just simply saying nothing at all, leaving the child completely in the dark. Now, when you look at this from the child's point of view, this breeds feelings of confusion and isolation. And most parents are so involved with their drama at each other, squabbling over the slightest of things, that neither of them actually understand the damage that is being done to them. So by the time they actually realise, it's usually too late and the damage is done. And that always ends up fueling regret and depression. I have highlighted this in Abigail's Summer. Firstly, where Felicity talks to Edwin alone in the garden. I watched her today, Edwin, and she floored you in seconds by just being honest and respectful. That is why when she walked through the village yesterday with our daughter, they labelled them freaks, and why when she defended our daughter in that restaurant last night, her honesty and respect, well, it shone through like a beacon. She showed this village for what it really is. Edwin swallowed hard. And just what is that exactly? She laughed. It's just like you. They're filled with bullshit and fake superiority, with their lies and their secrets. I really admire Bradley Wheeler. He's richer than any of us here, and yet he married a girl with no background and no breeding. And when all those hate-filled bullies attacked her, what did he do? He stood by her. He stood up for her, and he fought her and for her daughter. Now that is a real man. Tell me, Edwin, what did we do when our daughter came home? Did we fight for our child? I'm ashamed today because instead of standing by her, we joined them. And my daughter saw it and she called me out of it, and rightly so. Felicity took another long pull on her cigarette. Edwin shuffled his feet and took a sip from his mug. Look, we did a lot of damage control last night and today, as you know. Well, you know what this place is like. It'll all die down in time. That is my point. We should not have felt like we had to. We should have stood by her. Well, I wouldn't go that far. I mean, come on. She does look bloody extreme. I mean, my God. She looks like she just stepped out of a vampire novel. Felicity gave a nod of agreement. Yes, she does. I watched her today. She was naked and at ease, and loving just cooking with Birch and me. She had such a wonderful time. I looked at her with her long jet black hair with red tips and a fringe. I mean, she's never had a fringe in her life. I just looked at her smiling. I thought, what a beautiful child. I'm not sorry to say that actually I prefer her like this. She can run naked and screaming all over the house all summer if she wants. Because be honest, Edwin, how long has it been since she did that? 5, 6 years now? I love how my daughter has turned out, and I'm really proud of her. And if her father, you cannot accept that, then bag her off to Brighton with your mistress and leave us alone to have fun. I cannot deny that this is a part of Abigail's Summer that I really did enjoy writing, because it does show how hypocritical society has become, and how there are times, that all of us have to buck the trends and go with our own personal feelings. The village, like Edwin, see Abigail's new look as something to be ashamed of, and yet in a moment of clarity, Felicity sees the real truth of her daughter, and also, I may add, her own life, and it impacts deeply upon her. Later in the same book, Felicity starts to understand how much she's actually missed out on from her daughter's life, and in doing so, she doubts that she can make some sort of amends to undo some of the pain and the damage that she's caused for her daughter. Especially after a dramatic event happens, and Abby just refuses to talk to her and only wants to speak with Birch. And so she stands at the door and she talks to her best friend Hattie. Felicity stood at the door as the rain poured down, leaning on the frame as she smoked a cigarette. Behind her on the floor was a pile of bags and coats. She blew out her smoke and watched it as it floated up between the raindrops. Am I that shitty a mother? Something horrible has happened, and she'd rather talk to a friend than me. I mean, what does that say? She's as fucked up as me. Hattie sat at the counter sipping the scotch. Her hair was wet and flat, her clothing still damp. You're being too hard on yourself. Have you forgotten how you never went home to cry? You always came to me. Flick, she's like you in so many ways. I think you need to have a little faith. You know, I think you should have realized by now, you're not her, Flick. You never could be. She turned and looked across the room at her. I hated her. She was a witch. I've done everything I could to be everything she was not. And yet here I am, fucking everything up. Hattie, she hardly looked me in the eye. All she wanted was to get out of here and away from me. Hattie gave a long sigh. It was not like that, and you know it. We have no idea what has happened between her and him. All we know is she left the choir for a reason, and Edwin was very hard on her for it. Things between you two have not been the same since. Look, give her time. Trust in Birch as you did in me. You know, that girl, she's 20 with the skills of a 50-year-old, and if you ask me, I think at some point you'll find Birch comes to you. She scoffed. Oh, really? How do you know? Hattie, for all you know, I'll never find out what caused all this. Hattie put her glass down a little harder than she expected, and Flick jumped. It's what I would fucking do, Flick. That is how I know. Felicity turned to her, and Hattie looked at her with heartbroken eyes. You still cannot see it, or even admit it, can you? The bond we have, the love, the secrets. For fuck's sake, Flick, open your eyes. They're exactly the same as us. Maybe she did run away to Manchester to escape, but has it for 1 second dawned on you that it was because there was no one here to match me to you? Felicity blinked. How do you mean? That makes no sense at all. Hattie shook her head. It makes a hell of a lot more sense than you think. Look, living here in this hellhole with your mother, who, let's be honest, was a hell of a lot worse than Madge is now. You had me. I was there for you always. It was how we both survived. We had each other, Flick. Abby had no one. It's never been about you. I mean, that bloody robot you married has never helped much. But she's just like you. She felt as you did. It was never you. It was those fucking fascists that drove her from Wootton. My God, open your fucking eyes for once. Abby needed to find her Hattie, and she found her in Manchester. That is the first time that Felicity really starts to understand her daughter, which is a reflection of her own younger self. And she understands how she's become her own mother in a way, and has treated Abby in the same sort of manner. One of the reasons I really enjoyed writing this part of the story is because it does highlight the comparison between mother and daughter, and it also highlights how the same dysfunctional patterns have been adopted. This is so common in society as parents teach their children the very same toxic traits that they learned when they were children. And it's like some sort of vicious cycle that repeats through the generations. You know, and it can utterly destroy family relationships, which, again, absolutely goes against the narratives of society. I see a great many writers that in many ways they stay within the idealized boundaries of what society expects. And what they write could be seen as sort of feel-good novels. As a writer myself, I've always asked the question of what aspect of my writing benefits the reader. I've written some really deep and emotional passages that take part within the confines of a marriage or a loving couple. But I have to ask, does that benefit the reader at all? I mean, after all, there are many, many hundreds of books out there which contain pretty much the same themes. And yeah, it may be nice to look back on your own life and remember the joys of youth and the joys of those times. But not all life is like that. I do believe 100% that a book should at some point challenge the reader. I've always felt that books should, to a degree, show life as it actually is, and not a romanticized version to be, some sort of like Disney-like and all pretty and loving. Life, if we're honest, can be bloody horrible at times. And I think readers are very aware of that. And so at times I think it's important to show the darker traits of characters and challenge what are seen as the society narrative. I mean, surely it adds to the power of the books to make them as real as possible. And not every relationship is actually a fairy story. Some are actually fraught with pain and misery. And I work very hard to try and show that in the many different ways that I allow my characters to evolve and interact with each other. My life has had ups and downs, and I have at times suffered some pretty awful experiences, and some experiences which I've disguised and even given to the characters that I write. I think it makes sense that if my life has been the way that it is, then surely, for my readers, they must have had similar experiences. And so I add them to the stories that I write, and in doing so, I allow my readers to identify with them. I feel it is actually the responsibility of all modern writers to record the truth of life in this age. If you think about Charles Dickens, he's very, very famous because he accurately portrayed life in London back in the sort of late Victorian era. And I don't really think it matters if a story is a fantasy story or it is just a work of complete fiction. To be honest, I do feel that fiction has to be more true to life, because that really helps to drive the realism of the situations a writer will create. And that can only result in a much, much better story for the reader. I mean, after all, if a scenario is very, very realistic, it doesn't matter where the story is set. It instantly becomes a believable story. The book industry is a really hard industry to get any form of notice within. I mean, it's so frustrating at times. Writers struggle to be seen and heard. There's like 3.5 million books a year come out, and every single writer is vying for the same space. So I think, when you look at the mass market world of paperbacks, writing stories that show the full good, bad and sad in between the beauty and the romance, it creates something that's real, and it has extra value for every reader because they're reading a true slice of life. And that, to me, makes writing so much more real. If you have stood by this podcast to this point, I would like to offer my hearty thanks for listening in today. I try to put up stuff that's interesting and unusual and show aspects of life and writing together, as well as, showing how books can be made more in depth so that the readers get absolutely maximum enjoyment out of them, which is something, I put a lot of effort into with the books that I write. If you really like sort of the episodes you've listened to on this channel, and you've not already subscribed, please subscribe to the channel. And if you really enjoy some of the things I talk about, then please give the video a like, because that really will help me to sort of increase the viral reach, and I can get a lot more people listening in. It's a little bit short today, but my voice is quite strained. So I will rest it up, and I will be back next week, and I will come up with something even more wacky and creative to keep you all guessing and thinking. Until then, thank you for listening in, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Writer Life podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode, or there are areas of Robin's stories you would like him to discuss, please add your thoughts and questions in the comments, and we will include them in a future episode. You can follow Robin on all his social media links, which you will find listed below, and please, like and subscribe to this channel, so you get the latest notifications when he posts. All Robin's books are available in digital and print formats to purchase or download through all online book sales sites.